Hello, I thought I'd do a little show and tell of this little clouded honey material that I'd made. So this is just something I've been working on in my spare time, just trying to create a clouded honey material, which I found to be more challenging than I originally anticipated. I thought it'd just be straightforward, straightforward as just putting on subsurface scattering and calling it a day. However, I did encounter some issues with getting it to integrate with the glass jar properly and countering the issues of having it in the glass jar, because the glass jar started casting shadows on the material and I couldn't just get rid of the shadows from the glass, because otherwise it'd end up looking like there was just a floating blob of honey covered with some weird thin plastic film, which obviously didn't look right. So yeah, I had to make some cheated adjustments in the material to compensate for that. Also means that the clouded honey doesn't, or this material for the clouded honey doesn't work outside of this glass jar, so I end up having to create a separate material for that, which might showcase towards the end of this video. But yeah, this is where I started. Excuse the poor depth of field, for some reason the focus shifted when I started doing these experiments. And yeah, this was my first attempt and it clearly didn't look like honey. This object here did not help at all. The lighting isn't very flattering, however I did do tests with the light at the front and the back just to see how it upheld in both lighting scenarios. And from the back view, it didn't look too bad in most of the experiments, but the front view always just didn't seem to look right. It started looking less like an apple sauce kind of thing, ended up going more kind of custardy. Then it started going quite nuclear, but for some reason I thought, yeah, I'm getting closer to something here. Not sure if I was really. The main issue I was having was that I was convinced that the parameters that I was changing were the ones that I needed to change in order to achieve the look that I was after. And in the end, I realised it wasn't really working for me and ended up with something, well, I ended up with this. And I thought, this looks promising. I was getting the right kinds of colours and tones that I was after. And I was getting this crystallising honey look, which I liked. Although I didn't like this sharp edge and this fold here, because I thought, it looks like it's meant to be a fresh jar of honey, except it's not been filled up properly. So just filled it up a bit more. I thought, yeah, this is close to what I'm after. Though I thought this was a bit too dense. It looked like the honey was a little bit too thick. So I just softened it up a little bit further and came up with this. However, I guess these would be down to preference really, because I do kind of like this one, but in the end I preferred this one. It's also easier to pick out the noise, because it's with the shading of it being much lighter, you can pick out the details in the noise much easier in this lighter version, whereas in the darker one it's not as easy to pick out those little bits of detail. So I'll just go and take this jar of clouded honey, might take the table as well, and oh, I selected it, there we go. I'm going to copy these and then just drop them in their own scene. Yeah, let's take those. Oh, I'll take the camera and HDRI as well. Okay, ooh, that was a bit wild. So yeah, I'll just do a quick render of this just so you can see how it looks, and then I'll get back to you, just because OBS Studio significantly increases the render times when you try and render at the same time, so I'll be back in a moment. So I did a few renders just so I don't have to keep cutting back and forth every time I'm talking about a different topic. And you can see here we've got the light casting on the front, light casting on the back, and you can see the materials preserving its opaqueness, if that's a word, but it does have a little bit of translucency where the light's passing through the thinner parts of the honey, which is what I wanted. And here I've done it without the label, so you can see the extra details of the noise inside the body of the honey and the gradient into the crystallizing honey at the top. Now I made this honey using a physical reference next to me. So I had a jar of clouded honey next to me, And I did steer away from the reference a little bit, just because the reference that I had, if it didn't have the honey branding on it, I could have easily mistaken it for something like some sort of apple sauce or mustard. So I realised that this material in itself was going to be quite difficult to replicate and make it look like clouded honey if I was following the reference directly. So once I got close to what I was after, I kind of steered a little bit to make something that looked more generic and could be identified as clouded honey on its own without having any additional branding to inform you that it was clouded honey. So the two main details I took from it were these blobs of separation in the honey, which I used noise to create, and then this grading into this crystallizing honey at the top, which I'll talk about this in a few seconds, or in a few minutes, I don't know, depends on how quick I cover the next part. Now, as you can see, this is the honey without the glass, and it doesn't look like honey. And the reason I've done this is because I tried to do the honey in the glass as just, as a standalone honey material, but the issue I was having was that if I look at the older tests, yeah, let's go with this one. You see you've got this high saturation in the honey, and then these really dark parts and then these really pale parts. There's a lot of contrast in both the brightness and the saturation, and I couldn't quite understand why. And then eventually I kind of realised that it's to do with the shadow of the glass, and I could have easily just gone into the glass material, gone into advanced, and turned the shadow opacity down, so it'd remove that issue. However, if I do that, then the glass no longer looks like glass, at least not in this context. It just looked like honey being wrapped with some thin film, which is not what I wanted. So I had to try and make some sort of compromise in order to get it to work, and this is a compromise I ended up making. I just brightened up the honey and adjusted the colours so I could get the subsurface scattering properties that I wanted from a physical standpoint, as well as the colour that I wanted the honey to have. So yeah, I'll go over that in a moment as well. The last part is the honey which I use for outside of the jar, which I didn't end up using in the final render, so that's why it's looking slightly more red than the base of the honey, because I didn't go back to adjust the hue of this. But as you can see, I adjusted the settings so the thinner streams of the honey looked more translucent, and the body of the honey drop retained its thick opacity, or it's opaque basically, but it does have a little bit of translucency around the edges. You can see it's getting a bit of light seeping in around there. I thought this is quite good. It definitely had physical properties. I mean, you may want to adjust the stream of it so it looks more plausible, but for the sake of demonstration I thought this was quite a good material, and it represented clouded honey quite well. So anyway, I'll go into how I built the material. Now I've got two parts to this honey material. I've got this main body here and this gradient up to this cloud, or this crystallized honey. And let me just get rid of the honey test. We've got this, I don't know why it's black in the viewport, but it's basically the same material that's used at the top of this gradient, just as one material in itself, which I'll show you in a moment. So yeah, with the clouded honey, we got a colour mix going into the overall tint. This is what's correcting the colour, essentially, from when I was having issues with the jar and the colouring. This is because using the overall tint meant I could adjust the colours of the overall material without affecting the translucency of the subsurface scattering and things like that, which I was relying on very heavily. So this was a way to introduce colour again without affecting the physical properties of the material. So I got this colour mix, and there's two inputs and a mix amount. Basically we've got input 1, which is the body of the honey, input 2, which is this crystallized honey at the top, and then in the mix amount it's basically a noisy gradient between the body into the top. So that's essentially it. We've just got the top part here, which is a colour which is built with two different colours, which are being distributed with noise. So you basically got the dark parts of the noise and then the light parts of the noise. That's basically what this is. Then the next part, which is the crystallized honey, which is just a mixture of different colours, and then the gradient ramp to kind of distribute between. And I used a bit of noise in the ramp just so it wasn't just a clean gradient from one to the other. It's just like a little bit of noise in there, just so it wasn't so uniform. And then for the topping, for this top polygon here, the dark one, it's literally just this part plugged in. So if I go in the topping, you can see it's the same part, it's just that on its own. And for the subsurface scattering, is pretty much this. Now you don't have, oh, this isn't me saying, oh, you have to use these settings to get the clouded honey look. It's just these are the settings that I used, and you know, for the scale of the scene that I'm working at, this kind of, you know, this worked for me. I'll say the main feature here is to do with the anisotropy, because with this negative value here, this negative 0.6, this is what put more emphasis on the translucency and opaque parts. So you can see here it goes like very translucent, and then when it gets to this part it's suddenly very opaque. That's what this negative value helped with, because if I had this at 0, then that separation wouldn't be as distinct. And I originally had this set at an even lower value, it's at negative 0.85, but when it came to the block of honey in the jar, it just created too much shadow, and I thought maybe it's a bit too much. It made the honey look quite thick and dense, and it looked a bit too dense for my liking, so I just dialed it down to negative 0.6. If you were to do this in the opposite direction, if you were to increase it to a positive value, you end up with something more glass-like. I think it says in the documentation, if I remember rightly, because I did check whilst I was playing with this setting, it says like if you increase the value, you end up with things looking more glassy, which is obviously not what I wanted. But when I started dialing it down, it ended up putting more emphasis on this separation between thin and thick materials, and I thought, yeah, this is what I want. So that was the main part of the subsurface scattering, which I thought was quite handy in getting this thick honey look. So yeah, that was pretty much the bulk of it. That was how I got to creating the clouded honey look. I could go over other parts of the scene if anyone's interested. If so, let me know in the comments below. If not, hope you have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.